Hello everybody, this is Dan Miller for Bluegrass Unlimited magazine, and today I'm going to talk about using symmetry in your music when you're creating solos. Okay? Symmetry is a very pleasing thing, whether it's in art or architecture or music or dance or whatever you're doing. Having symmetrical patterns and symmetrical movements is pleasing to people's ear or eye. And so if you learn how to use symmetry in your musical expression and use symmetry around the melody notes that you're playing, sometimes that's very helpful, okay? It's just another one of these tools that you can use when you're woodshedding and figuring out how to create your own solo once you've learned a melody. We've talked about this many times before, and at first we talked about using techniques like tremolo or double stops, or neighboring notes, or toggle notes, which would basically be, instead of doing a double stop, we toggle back and forth on the two notes that would form that double stop. We talked about using hammers and slides and pull-offs. We've talked about using some cross-picking. We've talked about using neighboring notes or scale runs, okay? One melody note to another melody note, you just move up or down the scale to get there. We talked about various scales that you might use. You might use a major scale, major pentatonic scale, major blues scale, a minor scale, minor pentatonic scale. Those are the five main scales that you're going to see in bluegrass. We've talked about also using scale patterns, what we call scale spirals or folded scales. So we've talked about a lot of these things that you can use, and why would you want to use these? Why can't you just sit there and noodle and come up with something cool? Well, you can. That's phenomenal. That's great if you can do that. Some people like the plug and play method, or what I call modular method. When you take a lick that you know and you move it to another place, and especially in fiddle tunes that are somewhat put together modularly in some cases, you can swap licks here and there and create your own solo that way. A lot of times that modular method, you repeat the same licks too many times. You get too much cliche licks going on. So sometimes you want to get away from that, so you don't just be throwing the same licks over the chords. And sometimes if you're just a lick player, you can get too much away from the melody. But that's one way you can go about it. Now, all of these things that you might think about. And again, I recommend that you take one of these methods, like tremolo, and try creating a whole solo just using that. Then try just double stops. Then try, so you get a good feel and good sense of the technique or the scale pattern and where it will work and where it won't work. And you just move through like that. So you start to develop an intuitive feel of where these things, how they're used and where they're used best in creating your solo. And once again, you've got people that don't think about this at all. They'll just sit there and figure things out and noodle, and that's wonderful. There's people that are very creative that way and just come up with an endless number of things to do to embellish a melody and come up and create their own solo. And that's phenomenal. If you can do that, more power to you. But more often than not, when I work with students and I say, teach them a melody, and I say, I want you to come up with your own solo based on this melody. Typically they get stumped. They don't know what to do. How do you fill in between those notes? And if you have these techniques or these different methods to try, sometimes that's helpful. And again, we've gone through many of these things in the past, but today I'm going to talk about using the idea of symmetry, and this goes pretty much back to scale patterns. It's not really technique oriented. You're playing just single notes, and most all your notes are going to come out of a scale of some sort. So it's just a different way to think about patterning your scale around your melody. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to give an example of 4 different types of symmetrical moves that you can make. There's others, but we're just going to talk about these main 4, and we're going to talk about them in the context of using symmetrical note choices. There's also another avenue you can approach using symmetrical rhythmic patterns, which is another cool thing. The note choices don't stay the same or are not necessarily symmetrical, but the rhythm patterns are symmetrical. Today we're going to focus on note pattern symmetry and not rhythm symmetry. Maybe later we'll do another video on rhythm symmetry. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started. Okay, so the first symmetrical pattern I'm going to talk about is, the technical term, so to speak, is horizontal translation. The simple way to describe it is just repetition. So if I have a lick like this, I just repeat it. Taking it here, moving the same lick, same pattern to the next measure. A song that uses this would be something like Brother John, simple Frere Jacques, right? So in both sections of that, you have horizontal translation or repetition. You're repeating that. And then you're going to a new lick and repeating that. So you have a repetition twice in the first four measures of that. First measure repeats, and then the third measure repeats. Okay? So that's simple, basic. You just repeat what you just played. And a lot of times that's very effective to do when you're trying to fill in between melody notes. Is just kind of, if you have a phrase, just repeat the phrase. It could be any number of notes. You could have a tremolo is exactly that. Just repeating the same note, just a single note repetition. You could have 2-note repetitions. You could have 3-note, 4-note, whatever. You could have whole 2-bar measures that are repeated, and we'll see that in a minute. So that's our first one, repetition. Now the second symmetrical move is called vertical translation. And what that means is you take a phrase, could be any phrase, and then you move it up or down, basically start the same phrase on a different note, right? Whether it be higher in pitch or lower in pitch. You repeat the phrase, but not the exact notes. You repeat a phrase, sort of the, the same note distance between notes, but you start on a different note. Your folded scale patterns that we studied before are exactly that. I might do, that's a phrase, and then I go up one note of the scale. So each one of those four, I'm repeating basically the same note pattern, but moving it in time. So the example I have here is so I'm taking this go back. You can do it all over the place. Moving it the same kind of pattern up and down is called vertical translation. So a song that might be familiar to you that uses vertical translation is Lonesome Road Blues. Okay, that's the first part. Second part, you could probably hear that second part is just a repeat of the first pattern, but starting on a different note. In this case, the root of a different chord. And that's typical with these translational patterns. You'll be going, playing a pattern over one chord and then moving the same pattern over another chord, starting on the same note relative. Like if you play over a G chord, you'll start on a G note maybe and play a pattern, and then you'd go to your C chord and start on a C note and play the same relative pattern. And that's your vertical translation. Now, a song that does this, in a fiddle tune that does this is Durham's Reel, where okay, so what I've done over the first chord, I'm playing this pattern, and you'd see that's reflective as well. We'll get into reflective pattern in a minute, but then I go. So this pattern, I repeat it, and I play the next pattern. So I've got repetition there, and I've got vertical translation, okay? And I've got reflection because I'm going and then coming back. And reflection is just that, where you walk up a pattern and then reverse it. If, for instance, if you played a scale, that's a reflective scale. I'm going up the scale, I'm pivoting on the end note, and I'm coming right back down. If you lay out the standard notation and put like a mirror right in the middle, it reflects the exact thing in the opposite way. So you can see how this goes. That's going up and going back down the same way you came. There's several songs that are popular that use this. Run Rabbit Run, that little lick at the beginning of Run Rabbit Run. So I'm going, and then I'm going back the same way. I'm reflecting the same thing going back down. So that's what we call a reflective pattern, and that pattern is in Durham's reel as well. So that little first four measures of Durham's reel, it has repetition, it has vertical translation, and it has reflection. It has three of the symmetry topics we'll cover today in that one first several phrases of that one tune. So if you're familiar with the song "I've Got Rhythm" in the jazz world, that's a reflective melody. In the first part, it goes. So I go da 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 da, and I'm going up and then back the same notes. Another song, pop song, "Lean on Me." You guys remember that song? So that opening phrase, the first note goes, and then you have your reflective phrase. The timing isn't symmetrical, but the note choices are symmetrical there. So there's another example of a song. You can find all these symmetries in lots and lots of music. If you study it and look for it, you can find it all over the place. Okay. Okay. The next type of symmetry we're going to talk about is horizontal reflection. So we've had horizontal translation, which is repetition. We've had vertical translation, which is just moving a phrase starting on a different note, but the same phrase pattern. We've had vertical reflection, which is basically walking up a phrase and walking down, or walking down and walking up as a reflection of what you just played. The fourth kind of symmetry is horizontal reflection, and this is a little bit harder to wrap your head around, but basically what you're doing, if you look on the tablature pages where I have the dotted horizontal line drawn, what we're doing is we're taking a pattern, and our mirror is sort of going this way, and we're flipping it and reflecting it around. So if I did a pattern reflecting that, you can look at the tablature for that I have in the example, and you might get a better idea. Don't look at the tablature, look at the standard notation and how that's reflected. Now, the reflection can be anywhere. You can reflect around different places in your horizontal structure of the tune. Right there, I started here. So I started on G and just walked up the scale. Now that I reflected here around the E note. So now I can reflect around various notes of the scale. Any way that horizontal reflection could go from any note in the scale. And so I'm going to play a phrase just like this. This kind of folded scale pattern. I'll play that, and then I'll show different ways you can reflect that at various around various points. And I'm going to read the tablature here because I haven't memorized this, but so I'm going to need my glasses. So the first example would be, there's my pattern, and I'm going to reflect here. Or I could take that same pattern and reflect here. Same pattern. Reflect here. Same pattern. So I'm basically taking this pattern, and then I'm going to another note in the scale and reflecting that pattern back. So to get your head wrapped around this, it's going to be easier to look at the tablature I've written out and see where I've put that reflective line, and you maybe get an opportunity to play with that a little bit and see how that comes together. Where is this useful? Well, in a lot of ways. Remember we did folded scale patterns, like this one I just did is a folded scale pattern. I could now reflect that like that, and then I could go up to the next folded scale pattern, and then reflect that. Go up to the next folded scale pattern, reflect that, and then land back on my one. So that's a way to really mess around and play with your folded scale patterns. Do the pattern. Usually we do the pattern, go up the scale, do the pattern again, go up the scale, do the pattern again, go up the scale, do the pattern again. Here I did the pattern, I reflected it, then I went up the scale, did the same pattern again, one note higher in the scale, reflected that, and kept going. And that's just another way to play around with your folded scale patterns. Here's a different way. If I take this folded scale, and we've done that one before, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 1. 2, 3, 4, 2. That scale pattern, I could take that and do, and that's just a translation, a vertical translation. Do the pattern there, do it again. That's what we talked about before, that's a vertical translation. I could do a horizontal reflection of that, so it's here. That would be a horizontal reflection with a vertical translation. So it's those two things together. That pattern would sound like this. Again, just a different way to use symmetry to come up with different patterns that you could explore your scales with, right? And you can use those. Here's a way. Okay, when we did the folded scale, we talked about Blackberry Blossom. So usually you might play Blackberry Blossom like this. First three phrases, and it's just a repeated folded scale pattern. But I could go a different folded scale pattern. I could go. So the first one I went up, I walked up, returned to my original note, went one note down the scale, went one note down the scale. That next pattern, I started here, instead of walking up, I went to the third and then walked back. Okay, so I could do it either way. That's two different scale patterns that are folded scale patterns. This one, just a reverse of the same pattern. If I combine those and I did the first one like this, I changed it. I changed from the first to the second one. I have that written down for you as a vertical reflection with vertical translation. Okay, that's what that would be. Instead of going, I'm going. Now I could do those on the first two four-note phrases, and then I could do a vertical reflection on the third note over the E note. So starting on the G note, I did this walk up folded pattern. Starting on the F sharp note, I did the reverse pattern. Starting on the E, I could do a vertical reflection of that pattern would be, so I could do this. Sounds a little bit funky, but it's something you can play with. Again, it's like this. So that sounds a little funky, but it might work. It could be cool. This could be something that you could try. Anyway, try these different symmetrical patterns in your music. Try to throw those in there. Let me end this with playing Twinkle Little Star and throwing in these various patterns. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna play this. I'm gonna read it because I haven't memorized this. I just figured out cool ways to throw these symmetrical patterns into a song like Twinkle Little Star. And I always recommend students start with very simple songs when they're learning how to do this. Don't try to do any kind of new idea on, some complicated tune. Go to the really simple tunes. Work your ideas out there, and then try a little bit harder tune and go forward like that. I think you'll have more success. So if I'm playing Twinkle Little Star, okay, that's the bare melody. So I'm going to play this, throwing a bunch of these ideas, and when you see the tablature and standard notation that I put notes all over it for the different things I've done. Let me go through. I'll just go through line by line, and we'll talk about here. Okay, so the first one is the first one's like this. So again, here we have a vertical translation, staying diatonic to the key. So I just move that. Next we have a folded scale. So that's that. Now I did a vertical reflection. I went. You can see that's going that way and then coming right back. So that first line again. Okay, and now the next part, I'm just going to do a series of, I'm going to do a folded scale and then repeat that folded scale. So I have vertical translation, horizontal translation, and then vertical translation with all these folded scales. So that's my folded scale pattern, and then I repeat it. So my vertical translation is the folded scale pattern. I do it here, and then I repeat it here, and I repeat it here, and land there, right? And then I take all of that, two measures, and I translate it to repeat it. So you got a lot going on there. Folded scale patterns, vertical translation, and horizontal translation. So the next line is like this. Okay? The first part of that is just a straight scale run. Right, that? And then I'm doing this thing, that's called I have it notated there on the tablature as a note enclosure. And that's the idea where if you have a target note, that's my target note. Right? That B note's my target note. I play the note before it in the scale, the note after it in the scale to land on my target. So that phrase that goes right there. So I'm playing the note before it in the scale, the note after it in the scale, the note before it in the scale, and then landing on the note. Doesn't have to do with symmetry so much. It's a little bit symmetrical, going before it and going before, after, and then landing on the note, or going after and then before and landing on the note. You can see that as some sort of symmetry. But I bring that up just because I noticed I did that in the arrangement, and that's the thing in jazz they call a note enclosure. You take your target note, which is usually your melody note, play the note before it in the scale, after it in the scale, and then land in the note, or vice versa. So that's just a tidbit there. And then the last phrase I did a vertical reflection with vertical translation. So it's, okay? So the whole thing. Okay, so there you go. That's some stuff about using symmetry in music. Again, we used 4 different symmetrical ideas. We had first a horizontal translation or repetition. We had a vertical translation, moving notes to different parts up and down. Then we had a vertical reflection, sort of going up and then back. And then we had a horizontal reflection. Okay? So those are some ideas. Have fun playing around with that, and we'll see you next time. This is Dan Miller for Bluegrass Unlimited Magazine. Thanks.